Are you sure you want to continue?
Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again. We've made it to episode 200, buddy. How are you?
Great. This is awesome. I can't even believe that we've done 200 episodes of this thing. And what a way to celebrate by listening to these two Ayreon albums that I really didn't know as well as I do now. And I'm glad that I do, because I have a lot to say about both of them. And I had a really good time this week just digging into this like really long, with both albums together. It's quite a ride. And then capping that off with a little four-track EP that came out in the late 90s that we're going to discuss on our bonus episode coming soon, which I think is going to get some of our friends or fans are going to get a kick out of that. So that's been kind of the crux of my listening this week. But I did have a chance to listen to some other stuff as well. Thankfully, a little bit busier work days on Thursday and Friday meant more time to catch up on mostly new singles, as there has been quite a few of them. How about you?
It has been quite a week. I listened to a lot of stuff this week. Obviously, Ayreon first and foremost. Going back and listening to this stuff after quite a while was quite a journey. But I'll say this. A lot of stuff that I listened to really did not resonate with me. So in the interest of not slandering some albums, not going to mention them. I will mention a couple of the highlights, though, because I think it is worthwhile. I gave the new Leaves' Eyes album a listen, and it's a band that I'm not really that into. I've never been a huge fan of this band. I find them to be fine, but I thought the new album was pretty good, and I think it's worth a listen. It's called Myths of Fate. Came out last week. Really, really interesting stuff. Again, it's not going to be my album of the year, but there were a couple of songs on there in particular that really jumped out. One of them being called Into, or I should say In Eternity. And I'm going to post that this week. I think that's worth a listen for sure. And another album that came out, which was just not what I expected, was the new Holler album from Terrence Holler, former singer of Eldritch. If you are a fan of his vocals, you're going to enjoy this album. If you are looking for Headquake or El Nino Part 2, move right along. That is not what he did with this solo effort, but it was interesting. And I only gave it one listen so far. It just came out on Friday. We're recording this on Saturday morning. So I've only had one chance to kind of go through it, but it's just such a unique rendition of his vocals on top of, I would just call it kind of AOR-ish hard rock type of music. It's not really proggy. It's not very heavy at all, but it's an interesting take on him. And quite frankly, I think that his vocals shine in many ways because it really is the feature of the music instead of just part of this, bigger act. So interesting stuff from him. I'm wondering if this is a one-off or if he's going to continue to do things under this moniker, but good to hear him singing once again.
Yeah, holler if you hear me. I've only listened to the singles so far, but I've really enjoyed them, and it is a very different sound than what he was doing in Eldritch, but not necessarily a bad thing at all. I really liked that first single quite a bit. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I know that he has a band, so we'll see where that goes. I'm curious to see what people think of it because, we're both longtime fans of him and Eldritch, and we both had an opportunity to kind of meet him when the Eldritch played at Prague Power and talk to him, and I couldn't be a nicer guy, honestly. He's just a very down to earth and really great dude. So I have a feeling that we will probably have him on this podcast at some point or another. I would not be surprised. We did have a plan at one point to have him come on the podcast, and I think I got COVID, and then they had to cancel it. But we were going to have him come on and talk about the Monkees after Mike Nesmith passed away, and we had talked about the Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn album, and I thought it would be cool to talk with somebody who was a metal musician who was also a fan of the Monkees. But hold tight on that, because we might be talking to somebody else who has something to say about the Monkees in the near future. But
let me interject there. I have no idea what you're talking about, so I feel like I'm about to get a curveball thrown at me. But be it as it may.
You won't have to wait long. I'll just say that. But I caught up on a bunch of new singles. Also, most notably, I don't know did we talk? I know we touched upon that Marco and Tarja did a single together. They were working together, but I've had a chance to listen to the song a couple more times, and I have to say, I don't know that it's a very controversial take, but I think this song, Left on Mars, is better than anything from Nightwish's last album, Human Nature. I don't know who, maybe I could just pull up the song info. The credits, the song is credited as written by Marco, Tuomas Wainola, Olila Vili, and James Lascelles. I don't know if they're the regular members of Marco's band or what, but this is a really well done song, and hearing the two of them duet together for the first time since the Nightwish days of Century Child and Once, which I believe are the only two albums they appeared together on. It was very refreshing, and it made it onto my latest playlist as the final track. I thought it was very deserving of that placement.
Yeah, it was so much better than the last Nightwish, and I made no bones about that. I know that album made its way onto your year-end list, but for my money, it was a tough listen, and I tried listening to it in a different order. Thanks to you, you had recommended kind of playing around with the track listing. I appreciate the effort. It didn't help, but nonetheless, this was refreshing, and I kind of hope that this is something, right? Like I would love to see this go on tour, and I would love to see them, kind of play their new stuff, maybe sprinkle in a couple of Nightwish songs in a live set or something like that, and make it really just a viable alternative to Nightwish. I know that Nightwish has gone through a lot recently with the band, but I really hope that they come back with a strong album after their last full-length release. They are due to come back with a vengeance, almost like they did with the first two Annette albums, which were just really, really solid back to back. I feel like they're due for just a great album. So I've not written them off by any means. I've just kind of soured on them a little bit just because I think they're trending in the wrong direction, but this was certainly refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a comment on Facebook the other day that just said, it's amazing that Nightwish has a singer in Floor Jansen, and, they're not making their best material with arguably their most talented singer of the three that they've had so far. I think losing Marco was a bigger deal than maybe they felt it would be. I think that, and I've said it before, his stage presence and his vocals, even though he's just a kind of a backing vocalist or support vocalist, to me was such an integral part of this band's live act. And even their studio albums, his presence on the last album was kind of decreased, and maybe that was a sign of things to come. But I just think that like his exit is was kind of the point where like Nightwish kind of lost me as them being one of my favorite bands, and so hopefully they can, like you said, come back with a vengeance. But I have to say, like, if him and Tarja are going to work together and do this, cool, and it might bode well for maybe some sort of reunion in the future, because my understanding is that Marco left on okay terms. And so if maybe, he comes back to Tuomas and says, hey, Tarja is pretty cool. Maybe you want to give her a talk to her. I mean, I still dream of this, Halloween-esque Nightwish tour where like Annette, Floor, and Tarja and Marco and everybody, like pretty much, what was the Yuka, the original drummer who had to kind of retire because he has narcolepsy or insomnia. I forgot, one or the other. It might have been narcolepsy, and so that's why he was replaced by the drummer from Winter Sun, and now half of Nightwish is Winter Sun, it would appear. So anyway, that's kind of my hope. Hopefully they don't leave Annette home, similar to how Halloween left Roland home, but we shall see. And other singles, Unleash the Archers released another single from their upcoming album, Fantoma, I believe is the pronunciation. Song is called Ghosts in the Mist, another banger. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. And I'll mention Mob Rules released a cover of Iron Maiden's Run to the Hills for their upcoming Celebration Day 30 Years of Mob Rules compilation album. It's going to be 2 discs of all their greatest hits, and then there's going to be a handful of new covers, and that Iron Maiden version, or the Iron Maiden cover of Run to the Hills, is one of them. I enjoyed that. I really have always really liked Mob Rules, and their albums have started to kind of come few and far between in the later years, but when they do come out, it's always something I look forward to. I don't know that, I think the last time they released a full-length album was before we started this podcast, and that might be why we haven't talked about them that much. Yeah, their last album came out in 2018. So I think that's kind of why that's a band we... did we do one of their albums? Did we do it at Mob Rules episode? I feel like we ought to at some point. Maybe we should defer to Mob Rules expert Mike Crea for his thoughts on which album we should cover. But I enjoyed that quite a bit, and I guess I will also mention Freedom Call released another single from their upcoming Silver Romance album called In Quest of Love. Another good Freedom Call tune. It sounds like they're kind of sounding a bit like the early days of Freedom Call, which is definitely a good thing. And I guess I'll mention one other single that just got dropped. Visions of Atlantis has a single called Armada. And I feel like this is a band, we talked about them after last year's Prague Power, but this is a band I think that's on the rise. The singer Clementine Delany is really talented, and I have to say, like, I am currently obsessed with Exit Eden's Desenchanté cover. It's an early 90s French pop song that they covered that is just, I can't stop listening to it. It's the hooks on this song are just so good, and the whole thing's in French. I don't know what the hell she's saying, but it's fantastic. It's just a fantastic track, and I love it. It reminds me a lot of kind of like that post Mother Earth era of Within Temptation, where it was getting a little less gothic and a little bit more symphonic, but not quite to the pop level that they've reached now. That's kind of, I just would be remiss if I didn't mention that. So yeah, I'm caught up. I'm getting caught up on stuff. And I don't know if you saw, but Pearl Jam released their second single from their upcoming Dark Matter album. The song's called Running. Did you have a chance to listen to that by any chance?
I didn't. I just saw that. I'm going to listen to it once we're done. We got a big, busy day ahead of us, but I want to give that a listen. And I just want to touch on some of the things you said before we jump into all things Ayreon. I agree with you. Visions of Atlantis feels like they're a band on the rise. I was going to mention it in the news segment at the end, but I'll just mention it up front. Their new album, Pirates Part 2 Armada, is set for release on July 5th on Napalm Records. So obviously the singles will start coming over the next couple of months. it just feels like they've done what, they've kind of adopted the formula that a lot of bands have. They came on a bunch of US tours as an opening act, and then they came back to the States as kind of like direct support for another headlining band. And now they're doing headlining shows on their own. And I just feel like the popularity is growing by leaps and bounds. So it's very exciting stuff. They deserve it. You had mentioned Mob Rules. We got the press release from this, and I was shocked that they had done covers. I just figured, like, I don't know, they had so much material of their own to celebrate their 30th anniversary that I was surprised, but I have to hear this Maiden cover. I have not listened to it yet, but sucker for all things Maiden. I'm going to give that a listen.
I sent it to Mike to get his thoughts on it, and he was really impressed by it. So,
and he's not a big Maiden fan, to be fair. So
he is a big Mob Rules fan. So.
That is true. That is his band that he has kind of taken under his cloak and has really kind of followed them over the last 25 years or so. So, very good. A lot of stuff there. And now we go into episode, the meat of the matter, episode 200. The first time that we're doing Ayreon in long form. I cannot believe that it has taken 200 episodes for us to get here, but here we are. And as we kind of mentioned at the end of last week's podcast, we had a little bit of a little debate back and forth as to which Ayreon album or albums to cover, because they're just very different from one another. They all have a different cast of characters, especially on vocals. And so we settled on what was, for me, my first kind of exposure to the band back in 2000 with the Universal Migrator Part 1 and 2. And just to give a little peek behind the curtain, I fell head over heels in love with this band that when this album came out, I went back and bought their previous album, Into the Electric Castle, which is a whole nother odyssey that we should talk about at some point. And I couldn't even find it new, so I had to buy it used because they just, it was so hard to find this stuff back then. And since then, everything's been re-released and repackaged and remastered and stuff like that. But it was nice to go back in time, and I just want to kind of set the stage. It's early 2000, and I think we found out probably somewhere online that this band Ayreon, who I had never heard of up until that point, was releasing a double album in two separate parts. And what automatically caught my eye was part 2. Just because of the vocalists that were on this album, which basically, for our purposes, was a who's who of what we were listening to in the late 90s. Symphony
do you remember the American Basketball Olympic Dream Team from 1994?
It was 92, but I'm with you.
Okay, 92. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, you had Michael Jordan and David Robinson and Larry Bird, and then you had Russell Allen and Bruce Dickinson and Andy Darris all on an album, right? It was a great comparison. And the irony is that they come out with both of these albums, and they could not be any more different. Released on the same day, June 20th, 2000. So we're coming up on 25 years pretty quickly. But you're talking about two dense albums with a cohesive background in many ways, but they could not be any more different from each other. And ironically, I went through an exercise this week where I was in my garage. I was putting together a new barbecue grill. So I had about 2 hours, and I started playing the albums back to back, but I inadvertently hit shuffle. And so the songs are coming on.
That's really interesting.
It was a trip because, like, the dichotomy between Timo Cotipelto and Neil Morse is just like bang. But like, I loved it. It was really cool, and it was kind of an interesting way to listen to these albums. Needless to say, I only did that once. That was a one-time thing, and I'll never do that again. But at the time, I'm like, this is really interesting. And I actually had some of the B-sides sprinkled in because they would come out with this album again, and they would re-release it on Inside Out, where they would have all these other outtakes of the songs, studio quality, sounded great, but with a completely different set of singers. And there's one or two of them that are just mind-blowingly good, and you almost wonder, well, why didn't they make it on the album? But we'll get there in a little bit, because I think I know why, at least in one of the cases. So we'll get there. But what do you remember? Like, and we were in high school at the time, but do you remember hearing this for the first time? How did we find out about this? Because I don't recall.
I don't either. I'm sure that you had told me about Ayreon after high school. I don't remember hearing of them during high school. So it was probably when I was in college, sometime between, mid 2000 to mid 2004. And I remember seeing this lineup, and I think I listened to the part 2 album and was just like, and I say this a lot, I wasn't ready for it. It was just like, because I'm looking at this list of singers and I'm like, this is not a power metal. This is not an Avantasia situation here. This is definitely more spacey and proggy and whatnot. And so I kind of put it away and didn't think much of it. And when I eventually moved to Rochester and became friends with Caleb, he was such a huge Ayreon fan, to the point where he was pre-ordering the albums, direct from Ayreon, as soon as they were announced. And he was a huge fan. His mom, Pat, she was a huge fan too. And so, that was part of it. But actually, now that I think about it, before that, I remember visiting you guys on Long Island at one point after I had moved, upstate or was in college, whatever. And we were in Ralph's car, and Ralph puts on the Star One live album and just starts it from the beginning. And one thing about Ralph is that when you're in his car, he pumps up that volume. That song becomes a part of your soul. And Set Your Controls comes on, which is a track that is a duet between Russell Allen and Damian Wilson, and Floor Jansen's a part of it, and Dan Swaino. They were the 4 major singers of that first Star One album. And I was absolutely blown away by that song. Literally, the first thing I did was I got back to Seneca Falls and ordered that DVD CD set of Star One Live on Earth. But it
Did
wouldn't
you still
be
have
until...
your dad's credit card at the time, or had you moved on to your own? I'm just
no. At that point, I was banned for life. But I think I had a job at that point, so that was kind of nice. But when I moved to Rochester and became friends with Caleb, I think the very first time he came over to hang out with me at my apartment, he was looking through my DVDs, and this was at a time where my concert collection of DVDs was paltry, to say the least. It was probably that one, Dream Theater, the Scenes from New York DVD, and the Stradivarius Infinite Visions DVD. I had 4 or 5 music DVDs, which has now grown to over 100. But he was like, "Holy shit, you have the Star One DVD! That's amazing! We need to watch this." And so we just popped it in, and I was like, "Oh my god! Maybe I should have watched this when I bought it years ago," because I was just. And I was ready. I was ready for Damian Wilson in his silver space suit, and I was there. I was all in. So between the first time I met Caleb and he saw that I had Pure Reason Revolution on my iPod, thanks to you, and then I think that kind of cemented that he had met a pretty cool guy. But
listen, my only hope is that when we see Damian Wilson in about 6 months, that he wears that same spacesuit, because I've got my silver shoes ready to go.
Yeah, you better give him his shoes back, because I've been waiting 15 years for this moment.
Great stuff. I love it. Makes me want to go back and watch that DVD myself. But I vividly remember getting this album before I even knew what Star One, was, and it was all happening around the same time, so it was a great time to be alive, as they say. But you got 2 albums here, Universal Migrators Part 1 and 2. Part 1 is the Dream Sequencer. Part 2 is called, the Flight of the Migrator. And again, 2 very, very different sounding albums. And just to kind of lead us into it, starting with Part 1, it's a very prog rock, spacey, almost atmospheric album. And then you get into the more power prog that is Part 2. Although even that, I would argue, is not true power metal. It really is a proggy album, but with some heavier, either heavy metal or power metal overtones to it. But this Part 1 never jumped out to me as much, at least around 2000, because I was just not as familiar with the vocalists on this album.
You weren't a big Mouse fan, huh?
I can't say that I was at the time. I had heard of Lana Lane. I did not really know any of her stuff. I was familiar with Neil Morse. Obviously, I was a big Damian Wilson mark. But the rest of it was kind of new to me. And even Floor Jansen at the time, I wasn't listening to After Forever until just a couple of years later. So this was all just kind of like uncharted waters. But at the same time, it was when I was really starting to cut my teeth, just starting to cut my teeth on prog rock, which would become a huge part of my listening pleasures, in the early 2000s. So we were just kind of getting there. So I don't know that I was ready for the album, but I was just about ready for something like this. And even when I go back to it, I hear things on this now that I don't even remember hearing 20 years ago, which is kind of phenomenal.
Yeah. I was really interested in this first part personally because the second part I knew more tracks from. I obviously was a bigger fan of that, list of vocalists. And so for me, I was like, all right, let's see what this part one is all about, because I really didn't know. I don't really know that I knew any of the songs from this part one all that well. And it's interesting because I did some digging and researching, and I wanted to know about the plot of the story, and I wanted to know about the creation of the album. And one of the things that I had read was that, and I'll pull it right from the source, which I found on Wikipedia. It said, after the success of the previous release, Into the Electric Castle, Ayreon felt he had to create an album that was a worthy release all on its own without being derivative or treading on similar ground. To this end, he made some fundamental changes to his previous composition process. He decided to have each vocalist only sing one track each, as opposed to the almost conversational rock opera style singing, which was utilized in previous albums. As Universal Migrator had enough content to form a 2-CD album, Ayreon made a key decision to sell each disc as a separate release. He believed his fans to be fundamentally divided into two groups by genre of choice, being either progressive rock or heavy metal fans. The Dream Sequencer was meant to appeal to the prog enthusiasts and Flight of the Migrator to the metal fans, so that each could simply purchase the album of their choice if so inclined. But to his surprise, both the fans bought and loved both albums. And the reason that I chose to read this quote is because that's exactly what my experience was, because I ended up absolutely loving part one, even though part two had my, inclinations written all over it based on the vocalist choices. I don't know that stylistically the albums are so far apart to where I think I had misspoke last week when we were announcing this, where I said one disc was a prog metal disc and one disc was a power metal disc. It's not really that at all. I think they're both prog discs. It's just that I think that part two is just a little bit heavier, I think. And when you know the story behind it, it kind of ties the musical side of things all together. It's a really interesting journey, so to speak. And I find it's interesting, the album you had mentioned, when Ayreon signed on with Inside Out, they just ended up taking this and just selling it as a 2-pack, which is kind of what most Ayreon albums really are these 2-disc mega. I think that's what I called it last week, a mega album. Because the stories usually told need, more space to flesh out. So this really is, even though the two albums were kind of aimed at different audiences, I feel like they really fit together so well. And like I said earlier, just every moment I got to spend listening to these two parts was a complete joy for me. Not a lot of times, but sometimes there's stuff we listen to and it's a little bit of a struggle for me. And so it's not a joy would not be the right word I would use to describe, listening to it. But this for me was just it was something that I wasn't as familiar with. So I did listen to it a whole bunch of times. It's not like listening to Stradivarius this episode where, yes, it is a joy, but I only had to listen to it once and it wasn't like a new discovery. This really felt like a new discovery for me. And I really, really just enjoyed it. And I was really surprised at how much of part one I enjoyed, like just so much of it that it was just a really amazing experience. And you had texted me and you said, why am I not listening to this band more often? And that exact same thought crossed my mind as well, because it's like, and I think it is just because the albums all deserve like a really deep dive where you listen to them a bunch of times and you dig into the lyrics and you dig into the story. I did that with their most recent album. I ordered the vinyl because I wanted the comic book that came with it, with the Transitus album. And I just really wanted to dive into the story. And so like, that's what I did. And I think that's why I enjoyed that album. It seemed like people didn't enjoy it as much as I did. I loved that. And I think there's something about Ayreon where he wants the listener to really immerse themselves in all aspects of things, because I think he immerses himself into the creation. And so that's the kind of passion that I can really understand and get behind. And it doesn't hurt that the dude is just a beast songwriter. Like it's amazing. So you say things now.
Yeah, I will. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with a couple of things. I do think that the albums have a discernibly different feel to them. I really do. But that being said, I think that this kind of paved the way for everything that this band would become going forward. As good as Into the Electric Castle is, and it's a phenomenal 2-disc release, it had a certain vibe to it. But everything the band would do after this, despite the bobs and the weaves that would go into each album, it really was a blend of both parts of the Universal Migrator. It was kind of the weird, quirky prog stuff, the little bit heavier stuff with, kind of Ed Warby on banging on the drum kit, that kind of stuff, just blended together. And that's what this band would become with each subsequent release, including the most recent one, which you mentioned. What I did not know going into this week was that the lineup, and I'm not talking about the vocalists, I'm talking about the band. The band is different on each of these albums. I had no idea. I just assumed it was the same act with different singers. But as we kind of get into part one now, there's a completely different band. It's Rob Schneider's on drums, Eric Norlander on synthesizers and piano and basically doing all the spacey stuff. And then Peter Seidlach on strings. But by and large, it's Arjun on guitars. He also did a little bit of key stuff, Mellotron. I mean, it's kind of like almost a 2-man show here with Eric Norlander's help on a lot of the keyboard stuff, whereas the band proper was really what you would see on the second album, and we'll mention them in a little more detail as we get there. But this group would on the first album, in conjunction with some of these lesser known vocalists, really do make for a very interesting experience, and it is very, very dense. I mean, this is not a short album by any means. It clocks in, I think, well over 70 minutes. So you're talking about a full CD. You're getting your money's worth, even if you only buy one of these parts, but they play very well together.
I think it was smart too. Like, I don't know, he might not have thought about it this way because, like I quoted earlier, like he was figuring, someone will buy the album of their choice, but like, chances are if I'm standing in a record store in 2000 and I'm holding these 2 discs in my hand and I'm looking at the back of them and I'm looking at the list of vocalists, I'm clearly going with part 2, but I take part 2 home, I listen to it, I enjoy it so much. Maybe I'm curious, all right, maybe I really should go back and check out part 1. I think he kind of alleviated that need to make a Sophie's choice, if you will, by just making it into a part 1 and 2, the Universal Migrator, the whole thing. But it's interesting how that was the initial thought process. I'm going to defer to you on this one. It says that, that this album, he goes in this direction where he has these different, a different vocalist per song. My understanding is, and I don't know the Human Equation nearly as well as I should, but he kind of goes back to that more conversational, almost like theater-esque kind of setup on this album where it feels like the vocalists are almost having a conversation with one another. Do you sense that there's like a bit of a difference when he moving on to Human Equation, that he was kind of going back to a little bit of what he was doing on Electric Castle?
Absolutely. In terms of, you had 3, 4, sometimes 5 vocalists on some of those tracks, and it was almost telling the story, but through the different singers singing the different passages. But musically, it reminds me of a blend of these two albums, because the Human Equation sounds nothing like Into the Electric Castle, like nothing like it, in my opinion. Whereas you can definitely hear parts of these two albums in not only the Human Equation, but all the stuff that the band would do later on. So it's kind of interesting how they go from, he doesn't release an album all that often. It's every 4 or 5 years, typically. And when it comes out, I mean, there's a lot of anticipation, not just because he's a great songwriter, but because it's going to sound great. You know that a lot of thought and work went into it. And by and large, there's going to be a lot to love. Even their weaker albums are usually better than other people's best albums. So he certainly sets a very high bar, not only for himself, but for the people he worked with. We're almost 40 minutes in, and we have not even talked about the songs yet, but I want to ask you one question before we get into the albums proper. In and around this time, obviously Avantasia would take off, and it would basically be the power metal version of this, where Tobias Sammet would put together a number of rock operas with a number of singers that were well known and well loved throughout the genre and throughout the industry. I know this came out after the Metal Opera Part 1, so Avantasia was already off the ground when these two albums had come out, but Into the Electric Castle had already been out for a couple of years, and obviously the two albums before that had been out since the mid-90s. Do you think that there would have been an Avantasia had there not been for an Ayreon?
That's a really good question. Maybe. I just think that, I think Tobias had made so many friends in the power metal community that, when you look at that band lineup, it was like, Henjo Richter, Marcus Grosskopf, and Alex Holsworth was his band, members of Gamma Ray, Halloween, and Rhapsody.
Speaking of the Dream Team in 1992.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that lineup of singers with, Matos and Kai and is right up there with, Flight of the Migrator as far as all-star teams go. But, it's a good question. The Metal Opera was released about 7 months after the two Universal Migrator albums. But, like you said, Into the Electric Castle had already come out. So I have to think that at least some of this was maybe made him feel like, maybe this is possible, to kind of do this. Cause at the time, nobody had really done anything like that in the power metal world. I don't know about in prog music. I don't really know that. I feel like Ayreon's definitely a groundbreaker in that respect. And nowadays, there's so many of these metal opera type things with all these singers, and some are better than others. And sometimes a great lineup of singers doesn't necessarily translate into a good album. We've seen that happen. I'm not going to drag people through the mud, but I mean, it doesn't always work. And plus, the guys who really perfected it were the ones who started it with Tobias and Ayreon, respectively. And I think they even, recognized that when they released that single, that Avantasia versus Ayreon single, and Tobias ended up on an Ayreon album and Ayreon ended up on an Avantasia album. And it was kind of like them kind of winking and nod, acknowledging that the both bands are kind of in these parallels in the prog and power world, which I think is really cool. I couldn't even imagine how cool a show with both bands playing together would be, where almost like your shuffle thing, where they mix all their songs together, Ayreon song, then an Avantasia song, then an Ayreon song, and it's just this massive thing. I think that would just be the most amazing show, and just that way you can take, you can use all of these different vocalists and whoever happens to be on hand, because there's a few overlapping vocalists between Avantasia and Ayreon. I had mentioned to you that I thought it was odd that Andy Darris had never been on an Avantasia album, but had been on an Ayreon album, and Michael Kiske had never been on an Ayreon album, but has been on on many Avantasia albums. So it's interesting, but I could yammer on for hours before we even talk about a song. So let's, actually talk about the music, why we're here.
So let's do it. This album, the Dream Sequencer, kicks off with the title track, and it's basically a Lana Lane vocal performance, but it's kind of it's not what you'd expect even from a prog rock opera. It's kind of a spoken word track at first with these spacey keyboards. And when the guitars kick in, it has the vintage Ayreon sound. I wouldn't say it's the sound of like the latter albums, but it sounds to me like Into the Electric Castle with these guitars. And it's this, and really what this song is a slow extended guitar intro followed by a slow extended keyboard intro. But it's really this 5-minute kind of prelude to the first track, which would be called My House on Mars. An interesting way to start an album, I think.
Yeah, and I think that they circle back to this at the end of the album with the Dream Seeker reprise, but this is, I think, just kind of meant to set the tone of the story, and just, the whole idea of the story is that, and this is actually a story that began on the final experiment, which I believe is the second Ayreon album, or the first Ayreon. I think maybe it was the first Ayreon album.
Came out in 95.
Yep. And so that story being that we're in the year 2084, the final world war wiped out all life on Earth. There's some humans that lived on Mars, and now there's one human left and living on Mars, and he has this machine known as the Universal Migrator that lets him go back to the past and relive moments of his life, but also go back in time and revisit moments of his former lives that took place on Earth, which he had never lived before. His father had promised him that he would take him to Earth, but then his father died in like the final World War or whatever. So this guy had never lived on Earth. He's lived his whole life on Mars. And so he uses this Dream Sequencer machine to travel back. And it was supposedly created to cure boredom because these people on Mars really didn't have much else to do. And so this first track is kind of just him, setting his controls, if you will, but getting ready to do some of his traveling. And it's really just such a cool story. So it's just digitized voices from Lana Lane and Eric Norlander, and it just it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the album.
Yeah, well said, well said. And then we get to My House on Mars, where the vocals are provided by Johan Edlund from Tiamat and Floor Jansen, as I had mentioned earlier, now of Nightwish, formerly of After Forever. And I think that this track is a lot more representative of the album itself. These really interesting and unique sound effects permeate this entire disc. It's extremely proggy, and the vocals are almost gothic sounding. It almost sounds like a chant in many ways. And I think that the Floor's backing vocals really add a layer here, which is not only needed, but quite frankly, a staple of the band's sound in many ways. It's a good tune. It's a bit of a slow starter. It almost feels like a second intro track, but you're just starting to kind of get into this album. And then about 3 minutes in, it kind of kicks off. I like this song, but I think it's probably my least favorite, if I'm being objective, of the entire two albums. I'm not talking about intro tracks, but I feel like everything after My House on Mars really starts kicking things into high gear, at least for my taste, and it just kind of never wavers from that point for the most part. But this is a good track, but again, almost like a prequel in many ways.
It's funny because if we were doing a song of the week for each part, this would have been my song of the week for part one. I think this song is outstanding, and the thing that gets me every time is whatever that keyboard patch is that he uses that has kind of like that very triumphant
Yes.
sound to it. It's very Ayreon, like it's a very Ayreon trope, if you will, but it just makes me so excited. And this song is so, the build to it is just so epic. It's not something you would think that I would be like, holy shit, this is awesome.
I'm shocked. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I just think it's I think it makes sense as kind of like the first full length song on the album, because it almost like tempers your expectations, that it's not like this song that just comes out the gates, like just blazing the way that, say, Dawn of a Million Souls does on part 2. It kind of, almost lulls you into to more of a sense of what this album is going to be. It's going to be a little more chill than part 2. And yeah, like it is kind of almost too chill, and then all of a sudden, like those keys come in, and it's just like, yes, here we go. I thought this was really cool. Another thing I found really interesting, and I didn't know this before, is that Ayreon has some of his vocalists write their own lyrics, which I think is really kind of gives each song its own kind of flavor, letting the vocalists have that free reign, which I think is really cool. And not to mention, I'm sure they have, musical input as well, but really cool stuff. The song is about the main character of the story as a child with his sister. They're mourning the death of the father in the war, and the destruction of Earth in 2084. By the end of the song, he forgives his father for leaving him and breaking his promise to take him to Earth. But really cool album that really, I think, sets the tone. Ayreon has a way of just constructing these, even if it's just a small piece of music, just a small passage that just is so memorable. And I think that those little keyboard parts where it just pops it's just so memorable. I think this song is awesome.
Nice. I'm glad you liked it. It's like I said, it's one of those tracks that I think kind of starts to ease you in again, although it doesn't have the feel of the intro track. But as we get to 2084, this is another one where once the vocals kick in on this song, I am 100% like behind this track. And it's another Lana Lane piece, if you will, where she just kind of there's this chill vibe that he's able to create between the keyboards and her vocals, which it's almost, you really have the feeling like you're in outer space, just kind of relaxing on a different planet. That's how the feel that I get from a song like this. And it actually builds really nicely to this solid crescendo before it kind of fades out with a subdued vocal solo. I'm a huge fan of this track. I think that we're starting to cook here, and I think that you could do a lot worse. Even I think that a track like this would be attractive even to the power metal fans that are obviously looking at that second disc and saying this is an all-star gem.
Yeah, great. Well said. I don't really have too much more to add. Musically, I think I agree with you. Storyline wise, the song is actually about the war, which ultimately leads to mankind's destruction. This was referenced in the Final Experiment and also later revisited in the 010110001 album. I will not repeat that, but that's an album I do not know. One of my least known Ayreon albums. I'd have to revisit that or just buy the live Blu-ray that's coming out. I think they performed a lot of songs from that, or the entire album on their most recent live shows. But the character speaking here is not the main protagonist himself, but one of his past lives, as told in My House on Mars. The protagonist never actually saw Earth, so we're kind of making our way, through the universe, back through the past, and it's an interesting concept. And hopefully, we won't be here in 60 years to see the world end. So that's all I'll say.
We may be on episode 5,000 by then, but I digress. Talk to me about One Small Step, which is the next track here. This is This is one where the lead singer is a guy I had never heard of before. His name was Edward Riekers, and he's actually from a Dutch prog rock band called Kayak, and he kind of shares the vocal duties with Lana Lane. What are your thoughts on this?
This is just like vintage Ayreon, it just sounds like an Ayreon song. It's another, mid-tempo song, but it's just, it just grabs you. Like it's really interesting, like how, particularly this part one is generally a mid-tempo album, like almost through and through. And it stays interesting and it keeps you pulled in. And this is another one of those tracks like that. Like, again, it picks up a little bit more steam towards the end with those like really epic keyboards and all that. But this is a really awesome song. And I think it pretty much speaks for itself that, in the story, he's gone back to the time where, Neil Armstrong is landing on the moon and all that. So, literally says one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It's part of the lyrics, but it also has samples from voices of astronauts recorded during moon landings, which is such a cool touch. Very cool track. More backing vocals from Lana Lane, who I think is a kind of an unsung hero on this album, because she's does a lot of the vocals and backing vocals and stuff. But I have a feeling you really like this one.
Yeah, this is a good one. I like the laser beam sounds at the beginning, which are kind of a nice touch, and again give to that whole space rock feel. I like the cadence to the drum tracks, and I just find that the album is really hitting a nice groove by this point. The acoustic guitars sound great, let alone the proficiency, but they just, something in the way that it's recorded, it sounds great with these beautiful vocal lines during the verses. There's something about this track, and it's very subtle, so I don't think that most people will hear it, but I almost get a vibe of Angra's Rebirth song on this track, and I've always felt that. I can't really explain why, but there's something about this song that reminds me of that classic Angra track. The instrumental section is a little bit blah, but it actually picks up nicely. So even though it starts off slow, it ends very well, and it almost makes you sway to the beat. I'm a fan of this song, as I am the next one, which has a name that I always forget, but it's called The Shooting Company of Captain Franz B. Koch, and that's C-O-C-Q. The funny name, but this is a reference to Captain Franz and his militia that was immortalized on a painting called The Night Watch by Rembrandt, and apparently it goes back to 1642. But again, I was not familiar with Captain Koch, but it is apparently, I would argue, maybe the best song on the album, if not a close second. It has this really spooky vibe to it, and I think that makes for a very interesting sound. And then again, those acoustic guitars kick in. But then when the electric guitars come in behind it, I actually love the riff itself. It is slow but beautiful, and the dichotomy between the keyboards and the vocals here, sung by someone that I, quite frankly, also never knew, and that's someone by the name of Mouse. I have no idea what or who that is. That might be Avantasia's Ernie. I don't know what's going on here, but Mouse. This is
Fish was on the previous album, so you have to have Mouse on
I know who Fish is. That's the difference. I don't know who Mouse is. But I think this is a really interesting piece. I think the instrumental section kind of comes down, but it's done on purpose, and then it manages to pick up with an awesome guitar solo. And then towards the end, and this is really interesting, it has this modern era Beatles vibe to it, almost like Let It Be Beatles vibe to it, which is a nice, strong way to end the song. I'm a fan of this one.
I'll tell you, the thing that I love most about this song is that I love the vocals of Mouse. Like, it has this 60s and 70s kind of like British invasion kind of vibe to it. I don't know if it, maybe like a late era Beatles vocal, like I'm thinking of like Abbey Road or around that time.
Totally. I mean, like I said, I hear like 1968, 69 Beatles.
It's such a nice change because like there's so many of these vocalists that we're obviously, very familiar with nowadays. And this is such a completely different vibe from particularly versus anybody you're going to hear on part 2. But I love that. Just a totally different vibe. And I think it fits the song so well. Another kind of mid-tempo chill song, has a little bit more of explosive parts towards the end. But another really cool tune, and definitely you can feel like that Ayreon's love for like that 60s and 70s era of classic rock kind of shines through. I think there's a lot of Pink Floyd that kind of shines through on some of the tracks as well. But yeah, I definitely got a bit of a late era Beatles vibe as well on this one.
Yeah, I like it. And then we get to Dragon on the Sea, another Lana Lane tune here. This one is interesting. This one, they add a little bit of a, I'll say it this way. This was a song that I think is just exceptionally well produced. And it really is a testament to Arjun, not just as a songwriter, but as the producer, because the way that the vocals kind of carry this tune and the interplay between the verses and the chorus, which are so distinguishable from one another with those proggy keyboards behind it. I'm a fan, and I would say that this is one of the more memorable tracks on the tune, maybe one of the more digestible songs as well, and wildly underrated.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. Again, another kind of, mid-paced, fairly mellow kind of tune. Again, picks up more steam towards the end. I'm sensing a theme here. I really like Lana Lane's vocals. I wish I listened to more stuff that features her. She's actually an American vocalist, which I don't know that you see a ton of American singers on either of these albums. But this, she I think she has kind of a Floor-esque kind of tone to her voice, but again, just wild, like out there keyboards, and this is making reference to Queen Elizabeth I and her speech to the troops at Tilbury, given by her in July 1588, on the light of an attack by the Spanish Armada. So we had a militia in the last song and an armada in this song. And the English fleet won the battle under the leadership of Sir Francis Drake, who is known as the Dragon on the Sea, thus the title of the song. And Eric Norlander actually wrote the lyrics to the song. But another just really cool song. I feel like I really don't have too much to add as far as the music goes, because I feel like you're really nailing these descriptions, and I don't really have too much more to add. But I considering like how mid-tempo and mellow a lot of this album is, again, like I really enjoyed it, and I don't feel like I'm expressing that in my description, because it's just kind of hard to describe to me. But just every song so far has been just very enjoyable for me.
I was surprised to find out that the next track, Temple of the Cat, is the one that Arjun likes the least. And I'm not quite sure why. It's not my favorite song either. I think it's maybe the most upbeat ballad on the entire album. It has a very folky feel to it. And I actually hear some Cellar Darling in this. Like if you listen to modern day Cellar Darling, I feel like this is an extension of what they are. I think the vocal harmonies are great. It's very string heavy, but I think it's effective, and it's kind of a nice complement to some of this stuff. And then there's a flute solo, which if there's two people that love a good flute solo, it's the Metal Exchange guys. But it reminds me of Shadow Gallery.
And Carl Cadden James.
Exactly. Like I said, it reminds me of Shadow Gallery in many ways. I'm surprised Arjun doesn't like this song. I have a feeling that you like it a little more than he.
That shocked me that he said this was his least favorite Ayreon song. I love this song. This is one of my favorite tracks on either album. It's so spacey and floaty, but it's just got this vibe to it that's so like, just, I don't know. It's almost like warm. There's a warmth to it. I love the singer is Jacqueline Govert. She's the singer of a Dutch band called Krezip. Sure I butchered that, but her vocals are really unique, and I just was just really enjoyed them immediately. As soon as I heard her voice, I was like, oh, this is nice. This is a nice, again, like somebody totally different. I don't know. I would love to ask Ayreon what his problem is with this song, because I think it's great. I think it's that there's nothing like this on part two, like, because the part two is just really kind of balls to the wall from start to finish, and this is just, I don't know, I think this is just such a really nice ballad like song. I don't know if maybe it's the lyrical content that maybe he doesn't care for. I don't know. It's about the Mayan civilization and the Jaguar Temple and the city of Tikal. Certain samples used come from an authentic Mayan festival, which I think is incredible. Like, I don't know. I think this is one of the songs I went back and listened to like by itself because I just enjoyed it so much. I played it in my car last night. Like, I think it's great. It's very folky, and I don't know. I'm a little shocked that he, maybe he just likes his song so much, and this one just happens to be, he still loves it, but it just loves it the least. I don't know. But
there you go. It's like, you're choosing between your children, right? You love them all, but how do you distinguish? So I don't know.
The one that makes the most money. Go ahead.
Yeah. Did somebody say nest egg? Talk to me about Carried by the Wind. This one I know is based on like Irish folk music, which is, I think, quite apparent by the way that this, song kind of carries itself, and it's based on one of the protagonists from The Final Experiment, and the song was actually sung by Arjun himself. So what are your thoughts on this one? Because I have some distinct thoughts on this one, I think.
Like this one a lot. I think Ayreon is a underrated vocalist, and of course, like when you surround yourself with the list of vocalists that he has in his career, I mean, it's kind of hard to compete with the Damian Wilsons and the Russell Allens of the world, but I think that he has such a unique sounding voice that it really stands out. It's closer to Mouse than it is to, Timo Kotipelto. I'll say that. But it just, again, has it just feels like an Ayreon kind of tune. It has all those kind of feels that you get from him. I feel like it's a bit more upbeat than the rest of part one. And again, it's kind of like quiet verse with a little bit more of a, powerful chorus. It reminds me of what he would end up doing on The Gentle Storm years later with Anneke. Really good song. I like this one a lot, and I thought that it was a really good counterpoint to that. Really, it's interesting because this is folky, and Temple of the Cat was also folky, but in a completely different way. That was like almost like a folk ballad, and this is more of an upbeat folk tune. But I think it was a really nice counterpoint to that previous mellower song, because this has a little bit more of a gait to it. That I just think this is a really cool tune.
That was very well said. I think that the instrumental passages here, those folky, upbeat instrumental passages, are fantastic and really kind of tends to speak to what the song is about. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a simple song, but it's really effective. And it has, for my money, this song could have easily been on Into the Electric Castle. I think that it just sounds like what he had been doing just 2 years prior. It's a good song, and I think that if you're going to play one song for somebody off the album, this might be the song you play for the novice, because I think there's a lot that people who may not otherwise be ardent prog rock fans would kind of sink their teeth into. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that. And then we get to And the Druids, easy for me to say, And the Druids Turn to Stone. This is a song sung by none other than Damian Wilson. And the second that his vocals come shining through, I am automatically listening with even that much more attention, because his vocals are just, they're mesmerizing. And there's these whimsical verses that are just tailor-made for his vocal prowess. And this is something I would be remiss not to say about every song that Ayreon writes. His ability to write songs that are almost tailored to the singer of that particular song is almost unlike anybody else I've ever seen. It's unbelievable what he's able to get out of these great singers, but then just almost adding a little check mark to it and going up just a little bit to make it stand out that much more. This is a really underrated tune that's very well written. Some of the most simple but catchy guitar lines on the album. And believe it or not, there's a passage about midway through before the acoustic guitars solo that is actually rather heavy. And I think it's like the heaviest passage on the entire album, for at least based on my ears. Great song. Nobody ever talks about it. And all hail Damian Wilson.
Yeah, this is a track that he has been playing on his what's the name of his tour that he's been doing? I think right now he's doing a tour with Adam Wakeman to
Yes.
kind of support their album. But prior to that, One Night Only, Night with a K, was the name of the tour he was doing, where he was kind of doing a like career retrospective of his everything that he's done. I believe he's going to be bringing a shortened version of this to Prague Power USA this year.
Let me just say, this is a shame. I'm looking at the set list from when he's doing like a full 19-song headlining set. Oh my God. This is incredible. It's, I don't know, and I'm going to just go on a complete tangent here. How do you cut songs off of this? Like,
I know, I'm looking at it too. Like, he opens with Sanity's End, for Christ's sake.
I know. Better not cut that. I'll just say that. But how do you cut songs off of this set list? I don't know. But yes, to your point, they play And the Druids Turn to Stone. I will officially mark out if he sings this in Atlanta.
Yep. And he also plays Into the Black Hole, which he doesn't even sing on the album. But I do believe he does on, you had mentioned like the bonus tracks with the different vocalists. He also, I believe, sings it on the Star One live DVD that I mentioned earlier.
I'm going to say it here. I know we're going to talk about this song later and who actually sings this great song. The Damian Wilson version of this song is probably would have been my song of the week if it was actually on the album proper. That's how much I love that particular version. And that's not to say that Bruce Dickinson doesn't do a great job. He does. But there's something about the way that Damian
What did that
Wilson,
guy ever do?
I mean, I beats me, but there's something about the way that Damian sings that version. And I alluded to this earlier, that it could easily be my song of the week. And it doesn't even make the album, but damn, what a singer this guy is. But getting back to the Druids at hand, what are your thoughts on this one?
This was one of the ones that really took me by surprise, just because, and again, it's, you know, I think what you said is spot on, that Ayreon just brings out the best in all of these vocalists. I think even more so, I'll talk about that with part two, but Damian could sing the phone book, you know, for me. Like, his voice is just one of the most unique and incredible voices, and I am so amped to finally see him sing live for the first time in September. Definitely one of the sets I'm most excited for, and listening to this album has just increased my desire to see that set. But this is, you know, everything you said is spot on. It's a reference to Stonehenge. Interesting that the way that it was built, or the way that it's described, is due to the uncertainty regarding the origins of the monument, Ayreon proposes the fantasy explanation that a group of druids was turned to stone by means of magic and thus became the Stonehenge. So kind of a cool little storyline twist there. But yeah, excellent song, and hope to be hearing it live come September.
Back in the archives, we had covered Spocksbeard's 5 album, and I remember you particularly enjoying that. It was when we did a little bit of a run, I think, of about 2 or 3 prog rock albums in short succession. I remember saying to myself, man, the guy's turning into a prog rock fan all of a sudden. And this is, I guess, the second opportunity that we're going to get to talk about Neil Morse as he sings The First Man on Earth. maybe my song of the week for the album. Again, I said it was probably, there's 2 songs on the album. This might be the second one. It starts off with this acoustic guitar ballad, and then all of a sudden the trumpets come in, and you want to talk about triumphant. I hear triumphant on this track. It reminds me of like the long lost Spock's Beard tune that never made it to the forefront, but then Arjun decided to write it. I love how you have these quiet choruses or quiet verses, and then this like bombastic choruses that are, again, it's just a really nice contrast between the two. And the song just absolutely drips with emotion, which is something that Neil Morse, I don't think, really gets as much credit for being such a passionate, in many ways, singer. Passionate. What are your thoughts on this? I think this is a really, really solid tune, and Neil Morse is just fantastic with his vocal stylings.
Yes, I love this dude's voice. And again, it's another really unique vocalist on this part one of a lot of vocalists I just was not super familiar with. He was one of the ones I actually was, and I enjoy his style. Again, this is another, like, reminds me of another late era Beatles kind of tune. Just has that very kind of spacey late 60s kind of vibe to it. But like you said, like triumphant horns, all this stuff. It's a really epic way to kind of close out the album before the reprise. And this goes all the way back to the appearance of the first Homo sapiens on Earth around 50,000 BCE. And you think, oh, maybe this is the furthest back in time we're gonna go on this Universal Migrator journey, but not so. As we'll find out in part 2. But I thought this was such a great choice to kind of end things. Just has kind of a triumphant feel to it. Love Neil Morse's vocals. Definitely agree it has a very Spock's Beard-esque kind of vibe to it. Great tune.
And then we get to the conclusion with the Dream Sequencer reprise. Another instrumental track, so it's kind of bookends on this album. I don't have a ton to say here. I would just say that it has that vintage Ayreon guitar sound with these like hushed drums underneath, and it's just a cool instrumental outro to part 1. I don't know if you have anything to add, but I kind of think we should score each of these independently because it really is 2 separate and distinct albums, at least the way they were originally intended.
Yes, and I happen to agree with you there. I think that's the way to go. I like this just as a way to kind of end it. It also gives it kind of a book ending kind of feel with that opening track. As no singer sings on this song, some fans believe that this song is the end of the background music played on the first track after the machine gave all the instructions to the colonist. Thus, due to the song's end, it can be interpreted as if the dream sequencer is turned off. This idea is supported by the fact that in the beginning of the next album, the dream sequencer speaks again some orders and warnings. There is no background music. The journey commences immediately. So a little bit of a dichotomy to what happens in the upcoming track. This was a real eye opener for me. This whole part 1, I enjoyed it immensely, and I'm going to give this one a 8.75. I just really liked it that much. I just think that it's just lacking in some of that like more heavier Ayreon stuff that I enjoy. But I mean, I was not expecting to like this as much as I did.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. I'm pleasantly surprised you liked it as much as you did. It's an 8.5 for me, a touch below you, but a really enjoyable listen. And I'm happy that it's part 1 though, because part 2 is so different and it kind of takes off, no pun intended, in a different direction, that I think that if you were to invert the parts, that it might not stand out as much. But as the precursor to what part 2 is, this heavier album with touches of power metal, it is really, really well done. And I think it's a great prequel to part 2. Well
put. So part 2 then.
Shall we dive right in? We get to the Universal Migrator Part 2. Flight of the Migrator obviously comes out the same day. And again, this is what really just attracted me to the band, because I think I remember seeing this list of vocalists and being like, well, obviously I have to get this. It doesn't matter if I don't know what it sounds like. And it starts off with essentially the time before the Big Bang. So we're going way, way, way back in time on this one. And the song is called Chaos. And then there's like these digitalized voices that really just kind of permeate the tune provided by both Lana Lane and Eric Norlander. But by and large, a instrumental tune, but with this power metal vibe. It's fast, it's heavy, it's melodic, and in many ways, I think it has like a neoclassical feel, almost like an Yngwie or something like that. It gives all the instruments a real chance to shine. And as I mentioned earlier, the performers here are just markedly different than the first album, and so I'm going to just kind of walk you through who's playing on this one. It's Ed Warby on drums, who would become like the long time Ayreon drummer. It's Eric Norlander is again back on the keyboards and stuff like that. But then there's a whole host of guests like Michael Romeo, Gary Weirkamp, Clive Nolan, and on and on and on. But the Ed Warby, I think, has a really unique drum sound, and whenever he plays on something, you can kind of just tell that he is on it. And I feel like this is absolutely no different.
Yeah, I mean, you just take a look at that list and you're just like, geez, okay. Who's singing on this? But yeah, just a great cast, all around, musician and vocal wise.
And so, any thoughts on Chaos as a song, or is this kind of for you just like the precursor to what would become with the vocal onslaught?
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think that it also is like, okay, this is not going to be, what you heard on that first album. Like I think it's really, if you're listening to the album one after the other in the, the order, I think that, it's saying, hey, strap in. This one's going to be a little bit more of a wild ride. And when you look at the story, it completely makes sense. It's really interesting because in this first album, you have this guy is bouncing around through, times of yore, if you will. And in this, it takes a completely different, like a science / astrological, trip through outer space. And basically, as the story goes, the final colonist decides that he wants to go even further back to before the Big Bang. And the machine warns him that no one's ever, gone back that far before. But he, decides that that's something that he wants to do. And so rather than going to different events in time, he's going through countless astronomical entities. And who better to serenade you through through the quasars and the black holes and the wormholes and the white holes and the solar systems of the world than the greatest collection of power metal vocalists I think I've ever seen on one album. I mean, geez, I think it even makes Tobias blush a little bit. But yeah, so anyway, this first track, Chaos, is a really apt name because it is a kind of a chaotic, like a proggy, but heavy proggy kind of instrumental tune. And it's literally the colonist is traveling back in time before the Big Bang. So that if that's what happens when you travel back that far in time, then must be what you hear. So
I mean, what better soundtrack, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense. And by the time you get to the first track proper, Dawn of a Million Souls, if you didn't know what the album was at that point, I think that it becomes quite clear when half of Symphony X plays on this track with Damian Wilson providing backing vocals. This is probably the most well-known song on the two albums combined. and I forgot how good this song was. It is not my song of the week, but a lot of these songs could have been. What I love about Dawn of a Million Souls is that Angry Russ does not make an appearance, right? This is the soft, pure, unadulterated vocal stylings of a man who has lost his way. Because back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a band out of New Jersey called Symphony X that played the most beautiful brand of progressive heavy metal that you can imagine. And this is what the singer sounded like. This is Sir Russell Allen at his absolute vocal peak. It has such a big feel to it, and the verses are actually led by some of the greatest bass lines that I've ever heard on some Ayreon albums. I love it, and I love how the way that Ayreon writes this, it gives Russell Allen just a complete chance to shine. I think this is just top-notch stuff, and it is so nice to hear a young Russell Allen really belt out some of those notes.
This has got me very curious now because we've made it through all of part one and Dawn of a Million Souls, and we don't know what your song of the week is yet. So color me super curious. But I was hoping that I would have a song of the week that wasn't Dawn of a Million Souls because this was the song I knew the most going into it. But it's still my song of the week because I don't know that there is a better Ayreon song. It is just everything I love about this band. Russell Allen kills it. You got Damian Wilson on backing vocals. The Star One DVD, I think, is what sold this song for me, seeing them sing it live. But this is, as much as I enjoyed so much on both of these albums, I can't take away my love for this, how good this song is. So let's give it a listen. I will painstakingly find a minute out of this almost 8-minute epic song that is honestly just one of my favorite songs of all time. But here it is, Dawn of a Million Souls.
I am not surprised that you picked this song, but at the same time, I can't fault you at all. This is just everything I love about this band is encapsulated in this 8 seconds or 8-minute song or whatever. I was not sure what my song of the week was going to be. What I did not expect was for it to be the next track, and it is. And so this was the biggest surprise to me of all. Journey on the Waves of Time. This is a track that I never really thought that much of. I thought that it just blended into the rest of the album, and I thought that it was just another solid tune. But something about this track this week hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just kept singing it to myself. I would get up from my desk at work, and I'd go to the bathroom, and I'd be singing this song. Or I'd be on my way home waiting for the train, and I would be singing the chorus to this song. Ralph Sheepers sounds so good on this track, and I don't think he's the best vocalist of the bunch. I think there are some just all-time greats on this particular album, but he knocks this song out of the park. And there's these powerful verses and these trippy choruses that are just so cool. And some of the high notes that Ralph hits, as I mentioned, are just off the charts. And then all of a sudden they go into this instrumental section with this 70s prog rock vibe, which is like almost out of nowhere, but it just fits in seamlessly. In a complete surprise. Journey on the Waves of Time is my song of the week. So I'll rip the Band-Aid off and not kind of stretch it out any longer. Let's give it a listen, and then I want to hear your thoughts. Well, there you have it, my song of the week, Journey on the Waves of Time. What are your thoughts on this? Because I don't think we've ever talked about this song like on the certainly not on the podcast, but even like offline. I don't think we've ever talked about this song.
I didn't even remember the song. I remembered, particularly the next 3 tracks because of the vocalists. I remember just going to those tracks in particular because I was just curious what they would sound like on an Ayreon album. But I just forgot about this song, and shame on me because this song is amazing. If it wasn't for Dawn of a Million Souls, I'd say this is my favorite song on part 2, possibly on all of the Universal Migrator. Just epic ass keyboards, man. When it comes in, like, it's just that there's a way that Ayreon writes these keyboard parts, like I said earlier, that just suck you right in. And like you said, like Ralph Sheepers just puts in an incredible vocal performance here. Russell Allen's kind of singer where like him singing prog music isn't really outside of the realm, but now you're starting to get into some of these vocalists where you're like, how's this gonna sound like Ralph Sheepers and Andy Darris and Bruce Dickinson and Fabio Leone on these, more proggier type tracks. And we're off to a good start with this one because this song is a real banger. I like this a lot. I had that keyboard riff stuck in my head all week. It just incredible. Great song.
Nice. I'm glad you liked it. This was a forgotten gem, I think, for the both of us. And then we get down to some real business with To the Quasar. This is another one which I remembered this one, I think, more, but probably because I just remember thinking to myself, Andy Darris singing prog, which I never thought would happen, but here we go. What are your thoughts on this one?
I remember the first time I heard this song, I was so disappointed because I was, you think Andy Darris and you think Halloween, power metal, whatever. Like, this is such a weird, out there, spacey, obviously kind of song. And now I think it's fantastic. I could picture Michael Wycath listening to this song and absolutely loving just how it's this proggy 1970s Andy Darris. It fits so well. The way Andy's just has that kind of raspy, not as high-pitched voice as some of these other vocalists, Timo and Fabio in particular. It really works. The beginning of the song is just more of like this kind of spacey, think of Andy Darris singing Space Oddity on Metal Jukebox. And then it picks up. Like some of these next couple of tracks have like are separated into parts. And so like midway through the song, it starts to get like crunchy with a really heavy riff and everything. And I would have never, of all the vocalists on this record, I thought Andy Darris would be the one that would fit in, or would be the hardest to fit in. And I just think that they absolutely nailed his appearance on this album. It's awesome.
The way that it starts off with the acoustic guitar, it almost reminds me of some of his solo albums. it doesn't remind me of Halloween, but it reminds me of a lot of the solo stuff, which was more hard rock, bluesy in many ways. But then the second half is like an earworm, and it just kind of gets stuck in your head. Did you notice anything about the instrumental passage about midway through this track? It always reminded me of Zelda or something off of a Zelda game, and I can't. It doesn't sound like it was a copy of something from one of the games, but it could have easily been in one of those like late, early 2000s Zelda games, like Ocarina of Time or something like that. I feel like they could have just digitized the passage and put it right into the game.
It's a hell of a question. Maybe if we ever talk to Ayreon, we can ask him. I didn't pick up on that, but it makes sense. But yeah, just really, really interesting. I'm not going to talk as much about the storyline just because it really is kind of almost just songs are about different things in space, more or less. There really isn't much of a storyline, just other than the the colonist is just slowly making his way back towards Earth from back before the Big Bang Theory. So that's kind of not theory, just Big Bang. Big Bang Theory is a TV show. So yeah,
next up, Sheldon, your thoughts? No, what I want to know.
You're in my spot.
I don't think I realized in 2000 what I know now, which is how big of a get it was for Ayreon to get Bruce Dickinson to sing on this. Now, I don't know how it works in terms of like how that actually happens. I don't know that Ayreon knew Bruce or if they ran in similar circles. I don't know how Bruce got on here. Bruce Dickinson was not an Iron Maiden at this point, but he would soon join the band, in short order. And obviously, the voice of arguably the greatest heavy metal band of all time makes an appearance. And if you're going to have Bruce Dickinson sing on one of your albums, you better give him the longest fucking song on the album because it's Bruce Dickinson. So he sings on this 10.5-minute track, Into the Black Hole. And I've always thought that this song was just absolutely fantastic. And as I mentioned earlier, Damian Wilson, credit to Damian Wilson. I think he just nails this song just the same. But even hearing Bruce in singing prog rock is just a trippy experience in and of itself. And it's slower, it's deliberate, but it's completely unforgettable. And I think it's fantastic. It actually reminds me a lot of what his solo material was like around this time, because it doesn't have an Iron Maiden vibe, but I can hear bits and pieces of some of these passages that remind me of Bruce Dickinson's solo stuff. And I think I've grown to appreciate it more over the years because, again, I think I just became a massive Iron Maiden fan after the year 2000. So it manages to get surprisingly heavy. And then the keys at the end, again, just really pop. I have nothing but good things to say about this song, no matter who's singing it.
It is a really cool tune. I don't think I loved this song much in the earlier days either. And I think maybe its length had something to do with it. And also it's just complete departure from anything I've ever heard Bruce Dickinson sing before. But, again, just, it works. It works really well. I love the more like, almost ethereal parts where it's just like Bruce singing almost to like a cappella and then just kicks back into like the heavy stuff again, just fabulous. Fabulous use of a vocalist that is not typically on, music that sounds like this, but really cool song, very epic, as you said, but doesn't really ever get feel like long, even though it is a 10-minute song. It definitely stays interesting, and again, it has 3 different parts to it, but very cool stuff, and like you said, definitely had to be a pretty huge get. And I bet you he sold some extra records by having Bruce Dickinson on here.
No doubt. I think that fans of Bruce will clamor to whatever he goes on. He doesn't do a ton of guest spots. I mean, let's call it for what it is. So this was nothing short of remarkable and still amazes me to this day. But with that, shall we take a trip through the wormhole itself with Mr. Fabio Leone, who again at this point had been, this is before Angra was a thought in his mind, before he would do his jaunt with Camelot. This is when he was the voice of Rhapsody, and he had obviously done the Athena album and some other, one-offs as well. But what always kind of intrigued me about this track was that it had almost a bit of a scat-like vibe to it, which is really odd to hear a guy like Fabio Leone sing almost David Lee Roth scat type music. But here we are. And then the guitars remind me of something that Roland Grappo would have done, just in terms of the way that Arjun, kind of puts these chord progressions together and even some of the solos. But this, I think, more than anything, is proof that Fabio Leone can sing anything and make it sound pretty good, because the verses on this are okay, but it's really the chorus that I think takes that makes this song's money. And what's nice is the layered vocals. Fabio not only recorded the leads, but he also did his own backing vocals on this, which I thought was really cool. It's a little repetitive. That's my only kind of knock, but otherwise it's a solid tune.
It should be called Through the Earworm Hole, because the song, this was the song I think I knew the most besides Dawn of a Million Souls, because I don't know, I would always go back to the song, and I just love the way that it started out with just that awesome chug to it. Just like it really pulls you in right away with the tempo to it. And like you said, like Fabio could sing anything. I mean, the dude literally can sing opera. I thought this is a fun little track. It's, I think, one of the shorter tunes, but it's again just really uses his his vocals to their fullest, and it's a fun track. It's probably the most like upbeat, fun tune on this on either of these albums, I would say.
I think that's fair, and I think part of the reason that you were attracted to it was just because you were such a massive fan of those first bunch of Rhapsody albums that it doesn't surprise me that you might even skip to a song like this just to hear Fabio sing something else.
Yeah, that's totally fair, and I think that it just at the time it spoke to my tastes way more than, say, Andy Darris on, To the Quasar, which was just completely out of the blue for me. Whereas this is, I think, made a little bit more sense for what I was used to hearing Fabio sing on. It's probably one of the more power metal-esque tunes, on either of these parts.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And then obviously it's time to get out of the white hole with Timo Kotipelto, who it's what also kind of struck me is that, again, we're going back 25 years. So you're hearing all of these singers, dare I say, in their prime, or, as younger men at that point. So their range and their vocal prowess is just at a higher octave. And Timo Kotipelto, obviously no exception. He still hits some of these notes, and I don't know how the man does it, even live. But the way his vocals just soar over the top of this, dare I say, like melodic metal track, it's not really power. It's more of something that you'd hear on a Frontiers label with proggy elements to it. But just absolutely great guitar work, really resonates with me. And then, of course, those proggy keyboard passages. I've never, I think until this week, noticed how intricate the bass lines were on songs such as this. But it too has that very triumphant sound that you had mentioned earlier as we kind of get towards the end of this disc. I think this is another underrated song that I don't think I appreciated nearly as much, back when I first heard it.
Same with me. I don't really even remember it that well, but man, that last 2 minutes, again, Ayreon kicks in with those just triumphant keyboards and just really cool stuff. I think this one was a little less off-putting, I guess would be the word, just because Stradivarius had some songs that were kind of a bit mid-tempo and spacey, and so I think that this kind of isn't that outside of the wheelhouse of hearing Timo Kotipelto, but he fits right in with this, cast of legends that was amassed for this album, and I think does a really nice job here. Just another really great song, I think. Good stuff.
And so we kind of draw to a conclusion of these epic two albums. We start with To the Solar System. what really resonated to me here was the production, because when you put the headphones on and you're listening to the sound effects kind of go through your head or around you, it has some really trippy effects that kind of start this thing off. And then you've got these gothic-esque vocals as well, which is interesting because the song itself, once you get into it, is rather upbeat and has almost this sense of optimism to it that you've made through the longest part of the journey. But despite all that, it's surprisingly heavy, and I think it would make for a really interesting live track. Robert Soderbergh is the singer on this one, and it's just a little bit different than I think some of the other songs on the album. It's maybe my least favorite on part 2, but it's still a very solid tune, and there are elements of it that I love.
This was the only vocalist I was not familiar with on this part. And apparently he's, had been done work with Ayreon, back into the earliest days. He's been compared to David Coverdale. I could definitely hear that. I think I might be in agreement with you that it might be my least favorite song on part 2, but that's not really a negative because the album is so strong. But it does at least, I think, get to where the storyline kind of picks up, where the colonist is approaching the solar system but dies as the oxygen on Mars runs out and the dream sequencer overheats. So, this guy has been through, the quasars and the black holes and the wormholes and the white holes, and he almost makes it to Earth, but doesn't quite get there. Robert Soderbergh wrote the vocal melody of the song. Planet of Blue is a metaphor that refers to the planet Earth, which is the name of the first movement of the song. But I feel like this is, while it might not be my favorite song on the album, it's probably one of the most important songs of the story on either album. So it serves that purpose. And again, it's really no shame in, on an album full of heavy hitters, even if it's not the best song, it's still, I still think it's memorable and just as important to the album as anything else.
Yeah, well said. And then we kind of get to the end of this with the last track called The New Migrator. I'm going to throw it over to you first. What are your thoughts on this last track, which features the vocal stylings of Elegy's Ian Parry, who is back with the band? And let me just say, as I've said many times before, I can't wait till September to see Elegy. I know we covered them in the archives as well. You indulged me with Manifestation of Fear. I want to do at least one more Elegy album before Prog Power, just because I think that it's something else you need to hear more of. But Ian Parry and Lana Lane doing duets on The New Migrator. Your thoughts?
I don't hate it. Plot twist. The colonist is told by the old migrator that he is now the new migrator. And as his soul separates from his body, his new mission in the universe begins. I thought that was such a really cool way to end the story after we've been through this whole journey, from the beginning of part 1 all the way to here. I did not know that Lucassen and Parry were in the band Vengeance together at one point in time.
Dude, so I was going to say, I had no idea, and now I have to go find old Vengeance tracks and listen to the two of them together. Them breaking up, or Vengeance breaking up, obviously begats Elegy and Ayreon, so I'm not complaining, but what it must have been like to hear them together. Yeah,
agreed 100%. Ian Parry has the unenviable position of following this, like I said, the dream team, but definitely holds his own here. Super just heavy, proggy, just a really cool track. I think this is one of the most memorable songs on either album.
It's an epic end. You kind of mentioned the story before. I always thought it had a very regal sound, almost like the return of the conquering king or something like that. I think the drums help to kind of drive this thing home. And it's really one of the proggier tunes on the album for an album that's obviously prog, but this is kind of quirky and kind of proggy. great solos that almost layer each other, where you hear like the guitars and the keyboard solos on top of each other. And a lot of the parts actually remind me of Deep Purple and the 70s, heavier prog rock stuff in certain ways. Good stuff. Great end to the album. And what a journey, man. We've done almost 2 hours talking about these albums. We have to do another one soon, maybe for episode 250 or 300. But I feel like this was really fun for me because as much as I knew a lot of this stuff, I haven't listened to it in probably 20, 22 years or so. It's just been pushed aside for other things, but I feel like I was doing myself a disservice by not going back and listening to this stuff more. Scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate part 2 of this album?
I would put this one a bit ahead of part 1, as much as I enjoyed part 1. This was just, I think, musically more in my wheelhouse. Obviously the cast, as I've repeatedly mentioned, is just incredible. Some of my all-time favorite vocalists, both at the time the album was released and to this day. I'm going to give it a 9.25, kind of averaging out at an even 9 between the two. Although somehow I feel like if I had to rate parts 1 and 2 together, it'd be higher than a 9, just because the sum of the parts are greater than the whole, I guess, as the black hole, if you will. But altogether, it's just an amazing package. How about you?
I give it a strong 9. This is in rarefied air. I think that there's really not a bad song on the album. In fact, I would say most songs are great, and I think it's aged well, and that's the key. I liked it when I heard it. I loved it when I kept listening to it back in the day, and I still love it. And I think that that is the testament to a really great album, regardless of the fact that I haven't given it a lot of time or in recent memory. So it's a 9 for me. This is a really solid release. And really, I'd love to do Into the Electric Castle at some point because I think it sets the stage for a lot of this stuff. But at the same time, he's done so many amazing things since then that it's hard to actually just pick an album to focus on because you kind of want to go to all of them for one reason or another. But yeah, that puts a bow on it. I'm glad we got to do episode 200 and talk about a band that we have neglected for far too long. I'm going to skip the news for today because we've gone way over in terms of time and we want to keep this digestible. We'll come back with a request next week. A band that we have not covered, but we've talked about a number of times in different capacities, and a band that will be playing at Prog Power this September. We're going to talk about Dark Tranquillity and the Mind's Eye album from 1997. I am a fan of this band. I don't remember this album. I've heard it, I just don't remember it. And I think that's because when I really got into these guys, it was some of the later albums in the later 90s and into the 2000s. So I look forward to doing a deep dive on one of their first couple of albums, and obviously something that I don't think you've heard anything from.
Yeah, I know very little from this band, although I did listen to their new single. Getting prepared for what the modern day Dark Tranquillity will sound like. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is definitely, as I said earlier, something that is much like Behemoth that we covered a few weeks ago. Something a little bit outside my area of expertise or even enjoyment. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, looking forward to that. And we'll get back onto, I believe I have the next choice the following week, which I actually already have penciled in, which is unusual for me. So we'll talk about something a little bit more Chris friendly in the following week.
All right. Oh, I think you might be pleasantly surprised with the newer Dark Tranquillity stuff. The older stuff, we'll see. I don't know, but they are very melodic and are very hook driven for a melodic death metal band. So I think there's a lot that you're going to be able to chew on there. But that is all in the weeks to come. So this has been fun, my friend. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to all of our Patreon members for all of your requests and for your support. We have a nice surprise dropping later this month for our bonus episode, and some other good stuff to come in the month of April, including a bunch of giveaways that we look forward to kind of incorporating with one of our episodes that we'll be doing in April. So cheers, my friend. Here's to 200 more, and I will talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you for 200 very memorable episodes, and thank you to all the listeners for keeping us going, particularly our Patreon family. This is 200 episodes, and I don't believe we have any intention of ending soon. There's just way too many albums we haven't talked about yet, which is kind of incredible. When you think about, I'll have to go back and count how many albums we've actually reviewed with the career retrospectives. It probably is right around 200 or so.
If not more.
More. We have had a number of interviews. And it's like we haven't even scratched the surface for a number of bands. I was just thinking the other day how we're definitely due to talk about Iron Maiden again. They have a number of albums that people consider some of the greatest metal albums of all time. Metallica, Megadeth, like just some of these real big names. And then some of the smaller names too. I mean, there's just still a lot of work to do, and I am looking forward to digging in and doing some more. So, this is definitely a milestone that I am very proud of, and I've really enjoyed this ride. So, here's to 200 or hell, even 2,000 more. We'll see how it goes, and then maybe when we hit 2084, we'll retire when the world ends.
Cheers, my friend.
Take care.